was going to say, don't know what this is going to be when you see my face and not art, but I guess we have a title, so maybe that'll give it away. Let's see. Technology. Just waiting for Colin to come in. There you are.
Hello. How's it going?
Good. Good.
You hear me okay?
I'm going through my headphones, but maybe not. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
I was hoping to use headphones so that there wouldn't be, that echoey thing, but it sounds okay, right?
It does.
Well, thanks for joining. How are you? It's been a while.
I know. I'm okay. How are you doing?
Good. Enjoying a much-needed day off. And I have a few minutes without my children or anyone in the house, so I thought it would be fun to chat with you about comics and YouTube channels and all sorts of things like that. But I guess I'll start with introductions. I think folks know who I am, maybe, but maybe not. I guess that your fans can join this as well. So, so my name is Sean. I'm the owner of Athenium Comic Art. We represent some of I think, the best cartoonists around. I sell original art for folks. And today, I'm very, very excited for my friend and fellow art collector and comics critic. Would you call yourself a critic? Do you like that word?
I don't know if I deserve that word, but I'll wear it for this conversation.
Well, I'm excited for Colin to join. I wanted to bring Colin on because he has a new YouTube channel. And I'm really excited for folks to watch the videos that Colin is producing. We'll get into, I think maybe we'll get into why the name change and the new channel in a little bit. But Colin, you did an interview with me a while ago. I'm sad that it is now gone for forever.
Me too.
But I thought it would be nice to interview you and give folks an opportunity to hear a little bit about your journey, especially in the comics scene. So yeah, tell me about. I mean, we don't have to go through every step of the journey necessarily, but I'm really interested to hear, and I'm sure people are interested to hear, just sort of how you came to comics and alt comics and small press, whatever, indie, whatever you want to call it, and how you eventually started up your channels.
Yeah. I think I followed the progression a lot of people follow, which is, I read Archie and Mad and G.I. Joe and the Turtles, and then started picking up superhero comics, Marvels and DCs. I was never someone who was exclusionary, if it had panels on a page, I was going to at least give it a look and check it out. So, some kids were Marvel. They only wanted to read Marvel, or they only wanted to read Green Lantern. And which is, I've met lots of people like that over the years that were they were into what they were into, but I was just anything I could get my hands on, comic strips, comic books. And I guess somewhere in my teen years, I came across alternative comics, Hate and 8-Ball and that kind of stuff. When I first came across it, I really wasn't ready for it. I just wasn't old enough, I think. So I could enjoy the swearing and then, the little bit of adult material. It was illicit, But the overtime, those came to be the comics I was the most interested in. The sort of self-expression, people, either just pushing boundaries or telling mature stories. So basically the whole Fantagraphics, Drawn and Quarterly crowd. And back then there was a real divide between that and mainstream comics or genre comics. But in the last 20 years, those lines have faded quite a bit. And so now, I guess what is termed small press encompasses so much
Right.
that it goes all the way from Fantagraphics down to somebody just, folding a piece of paper and putting it in an envelope and sending it out to people as a comic. It really runs the gamut.
Right.
Or people do stuff on Instagram. So, but yeah, I've a lot of people, they give up comics when they go to college or when they start driving or or life just gets in the way, they get into something else. I've never stopped. I mean, I've only stopped when money has prevented me from, I've had periods where I just couldn't afford to buy things, so I would just reread the stuff I had, but I've just always been into it, and a few years ago, I just sort of doubled down and got, even more obsessive to where it's just really my only real interest, to be honest. So, and luckily it's an exciting time. You cannot possibly keep up with everything. There's just so much out there. So there's always new things to discover, and people are always digging up old things. So
Yeah.
It's a good time to be searching for stuff.
Yeah, you're a true collector, which I think we can we connect on that sort of like bug that we have. I'd like to take a step back and ask you, I don't know if I've ever asked you, do you remember like your first comic, or if someone introduced you to comics? Is it something that, like some of us, like my dad, he would go to back when you could go to the drugstore and there would be a spinner rack or just like a rack of like Mad Magazine and like all this stuff. I think either I would go with him grocery shopping and he would buy, whatever, or if I wasn't with him, he would come home with issues. I wonder if you had anyone like that was kind of like mentoring you through it, or is it just your own deal?
I think, like I said, I'd read stuff that kids pick up at the grocery store and enjoyed them, but I never really thought of them as comics, I guess, until I started buying them off a spinner rack.
Mm.
I was a military kid, so I'd moved, 3 or 4 times within a year or two. And so I ended up on a military base on winter break. I knew nobody, here I am. And it kind of coincided with the Batman movie, the ads starting to appear. And so I don't know if that, I kind of went, oh, these are the characters from the Super Friends. I don't know what the process was in my mind, but I started just sort of randomly picking up comics off the spinner rack. And honestly, both my parents were okay with it completely. I know my mom never cared about comics, but she certainly facilitated it, taking me to stores or putting up with it, basically, And my dad had read comics in the 50s and 60s, and so he was very interested. He read a lot of the comics I bought. Was very interested in a sort of. He wasn't going to get into it as his hobby, but he would definitely come to me in my room and say, what have you gotten? And he would take a stack and go read them and return them in the morning, sort of thing. So
was he like a traditional superhero guy? Did you read any like EC stuff, or was he more mainstream? I guess I don't know what was mainstream, if everything was mainstream in the 50s and 60s,
Yeah, I think he would have been a little young for EC. He was born in 1950, so it was definitely the DC Marvel Silver Age stuff. He was the right age for all that stuff, and he read all that stuff probably up through going to Vietnam in 1970. So he was probably aware. He was aware of all those characters. He knew all of the Green Lanterns and Spider-Man and the Hulk. I mean, he knew all that stuff, and he had at least a vague recollection of all of it. But he would read anything, and he was excited to read something like Watchmen, just like I was. He wasn't aware it even existed yet, so it's like I had to get it for Christmas, and then he would read it too. But he loved that there was other stuff out there to read that was different.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's really cool. And you had said that you came to whatever we want to call alternative comics, whatever, at a point where you were maybe a little bit too young to understand, or I don't know if connect would be a word that you would use. It's really interesting because in my own journey, I feel like I came across a lot of comics that I wasn't ready for, but I'm glad that I'll be thinking about it, and I'll read like an article about some, like Concrete or something by Chadwick, and I'll be like, I read a single issue of that forever ago and had no idea, like what was going on, and have it somewhere buried in my collection. But I'd be curious, like, do you think it's important for young people to be exposed to those things, even if they are, maybe it's not the most correct time for it?
Yes. I feel like maybe that's
kind
an
of a
opinion.
loaded question.
Yeah, I think that opinion has probably kind of gone out of fashion. I definitely am sort of a 20th century First Amendment. I like people to have access to everything essentially. And I think for a lot of people, I wouldn't want to hand pornography to an 8-year-old, obviously, but I think that mature work could be exposed to a 12-year-old, and I think often they won't be interested in it.
Sure.
They'll self-censor a lot. So I think having novels for adults in libraries is okay, because they're not going to want to read Proust. It's like that's just not what's going to appeal to them.
Right.
But maybe having it around and knowing that other people are interested and just having the access. Because like you said, there's you'll read about things, you'll hear about things, and just having that register, oh, I remember seeing that around me. So, I don't know that the average 12-year-old is going to want to pick up Love and Rockets and read it, know? So, yeah, it's a tough situation because, you don't want to traumatize someone young, exposing them to something. I guess I don't have any memories of being traumatized by anything like that. It was mostly just kind of going, this is a sensibility that I'm in junior high. I can't relate to what Dan Clowes is talking about in 8 Ball. I can just see that it's, has some adult stuff in it, But then, and so I had one issue of 8 Ball for years that I just bought randomly as, probably a 13 or 14-year-old. And then years later, when I, became more aware of him and read interviews, then I, at least I had the familiarity of seeing it at one point, So I don't know. Everyone's different. Everyone's kids are different, But I think letting them have access to stuff that isn't just YA material is good. But then again, we didn't have YA material when I was a kid, so
Yeah.
I wish we did,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I was definitely traumatized by some comics early on. I had parents that were very, very encouraging of reading, of consuming media in general. Like we had HBO. I watched all sorts of shows when I was too young, but I distinctly remember, I don't even know what the comic was. I think it was a manga. And it was about like this wife that killed her husband, and that his like dismembered him, and his arm became this like alien thing, and started. It came from, I think I mentioned this before. A lot of my collection came from a video rental store that was closing that also sold comic books. A huge comic. They had all these like grab bags. You remember those? Like $3. You have no idea what's going to be in it. I loved those. They were always terrible.
Same.
But they were closing, and they loved my dad. Everyone loved my dad, and they were like, Bob, you've spent like thousands of dollars on videos here over the years. Sean can basically take however many comics he wants, and so I got hundreds and hundreds of comic books. And of course, my parents never were like, what are those books? So I would just kind of read through them, and I had no idea what they were. Years later, I found out like Preacher and all these interesting things. But yes, there was a few books that I like. I think I gave to my parents to like have them dispose of it because it was so taxing on me.
Yeah.
But getting back to you and your journey, So you read comics throughout. You're not like the rest of us who like pause for a period of time and then come back to it. You start diving more into non-traditional comics, let's say. When do you really start to like get hardcore into it? I mean, if folks can look behind you, you'll see a very small fragment of the amount of books that Colin has in his house. That I'm sure that started somewhere.
Yeah.
When did the bug really like take hold of you?
God, when I was 12. I mean,
Wow.
like I said, the level of passion may have dipped in and out, but yeah, I was fanatical about them all through my teen years. I spent probably about a dozen years from my 20s and 30s where I was also really reading a lot of fiction and collecting prose novels pretty heavily. And then I had a bunch of my comics in storage, and at one point I was able to basically get access and go through all of them again, and that just relit the fire, because the combination of seeing what I was missing and having eBay, the access to the internet, and having disposable income for the first time since I was young, it just meant all of a sudden now I was trying to fill in gaps. I was looking for books by people that I may have missed over the years, because I've been a Wednesday warrior. I've been going to the comic shop all these years, but there were long stretches where I wasn't ordering stuff from the comic shop. It was really just I would show up and try to get what I could. So and of course, there's mountains of this stuff. It's like you think about certain strains, and you don't. There's just untapped veins of comics everywhere. So yeah, I would say probably about maybe 5 or 6 years ago, the floodgates just sort of opened, and I had very stressful work life, and it was really something I enjoyed doing outside of work. And I've always been a guy who haunted used bookstores my entire life, and so yeah, I've just always been accumulating stuff. I mean, I love to find deals, and I love to find things I've never seen before, even if I suspect they're not very good. If it's interesting or offbeat, or I love to find a 500-page graphic novel that looks like who made this. Why did they make it? Who is this for? I love that kind of stuff. I love to find just oddball books. So anyway, that's a long way of saying it's always been there, kind of. If I had been rich and had a warehouse to store things, I would have just been hoovering up books for 30 solid years.
And that sort of how I connect. Well, I don't remember exactly how I found your Twitter handle forever ago. I know you had reached out about some art, but I don't know if I like followed that, or I saw you at some point, or you followed me and I saw what you were doing. What I loved about, I guess I love about your sensibility around this sort of niche, although it's niche, but it's also there's like 1,000. It's like hard to describe this thing that has so much. I was really attracted to it because you were giving voice to books that I had never heard of. And one of the things that I love about the hobby of sort of, collecting original art, reading these books, is that there are always people that have more knowledge than me and know of books that I have never heard of. And that's really exciting to me, because I think there's a lot of diamonds in the rough, as you said. What made you decide to start sharing some of your thoughts on books? I call you a critic, in the best sense of the term, because I think you do such wonderful reviews of books both books that are coming out now, but also books that perhaps people haven't heard of before. And I think what's really refreshing with the way that you approached things is that you're not always complimentary, right? Like we live in this world now where comic book sort of criticism often is lacking the criticism. It's either lacking the criticism or it's like so extreme and so misses the point that it's uninteresting to
Yeah.
me. And so I was just so excited to see someone being really thoughtful about how they were describing these books and being a champion for a lot of material that may have been lost to time. So it's a long-winded question. What made you decide to get on social media and start sharing your thoughts about these comics?
You know, I was a lurker on Twitter for probably a year or two, where I never tweeted, and I very rarely even responded or asked a question. And at some point, I thought, oh, maybe I'll start just putting up my thoughts on random books. And I'm assuming I'd seen someone doing that, or I don't know what made me finally start doing it. There was also a thing that still goes on. It's called hashtag my 500 comic goal.
Oh.
It's started by a guy named Mike Nichols, who also has a YouTube channel called Long Box Diver. And the idea was just people could track their reading, and it would give them something to tweet about. And I had seen that hashtag, and I believe it was 2020 that I did it. And I did enjoy it, though eventually it started to feel like a chore. You know, you start to look for thin comics. Yeah. But I did enjoy doing it. I haven't participated in it since, but I like seeing what other people are putting up there. But that just made me start kind of doing basically little, Twitter reviews, you know, and you're limited by the characters. And I tend to be long-winded, so it's good to have that sort of constraint put on you. And then, you know, Cartoonist Kayfabe came along. I think for a lot of people, it was just something different to watch on YouTube. It was something that was comic-centric, that it would have things that weren't just slabbing books, investing in books, the new Marvel crossover, you know.
Right.
And while I've kind of moved away from Cartoonist Kayfabe, it really did make me start looking around YouTube, finding out there's other stuff on there. And I found just, you know, some people, you know, there's not a lot, but there are people on YouTube talking about comics that I'm interested in. And so eventually I decided I would do a channel myself. And part of it was just, you know, I'd always wanted to write about comics or contribute somehow. You know, I've always regretted not blogging back when that was a big 15, 20 years ago. My work schedule was just brutal at the time, and it was just the sort of thing that it would have been more work, and so I didn't do it. And I've always regretted not doing that for myself. Right. And so I thought, well, you know, they've made YouTube now so easy to do, essentially, that even someone like me can figure it out, more or less. So, and I also, you know, I have a bunch of comics. I have a bunch of comics that, like you said, don't get talked about. Sometimes on Cartoonist Kayfabe, I would see them going through stuff, and those guys they know a lot about comics, but they would be handling something they didn't know what it was, and I would think, oh, I've had that for 30 years, you know. Yeah. So I just thought, you know, I don't really talk about this stuff in my daily life, you know. There's not, you know, you often mention no one caring about this stuff, and I'm the same way, you know. I don't have a lot of people to talk to about this stuff, so I figured, well, if nothing else, I can show off some of this stuff. And I also had the idea that maybe some of these things I had that I've never heard anyone else mention, maybe somebody would pop up and give me some information on them. Yeah. And that never really happened too much, but you know, you always live in hope that somebody will stumble across something and say, I know all about this random book that you've been interested in for 25 years. Yeah. So, but it's just nice. You know, I have enjoyed the community aspect of it more than I thought it would, because I've always collected in isolation, and I've been okay with that. But it's nice to have people commenting on your videos, enjoying what they're reading and seeing what they're doing. I'm always interested in what other people are, what's on their shelves, what they've just bought. Right. Even if I don't have any interest in the material itself, I'm interested in what they got and what thought process might have gone into it, what they enjoy about it, you know. I remember when you and I first started messaging, you would mention books, and I would go and find them on my shelves unread, so it was like discovering them again, like, oh, okay, well, someone actually, a human being, has told me they enjoyed this book, and it would prompt me to read that book. And Stone Fruit by Lee Lai, fantastic book that I had picked up but hadn't read, and I read that because of you and thought it was fantastic, and just made a great recommendation of that to someone just a few days ago. So that those things get passed along one person to another, and it is the most effective way to share things. Just your enthusiasm, PR.
Yeah. The funny thing is, I feel like I've never given you a recommendation of a book that you didn't already own.
That's not true.
You're always like, I've had that for 25 years, and it's been sitting over there. Let me blow the dust off it. Your collection is incredibly impressive, and I love that you keep everything too. Like I don't know if it's because of space, but I'll like give away books that I don't particularly like, or they didn't blow me away because I only have so much room. I feel like you're like, here's the collection, here's the section of books that I despise.
I used to purge pretty regularly, and like it's a few years ago when I got my stuff out of storage and was able to really go through everything again. I pretty much made a rule: I don't get rid of anything unless it's a double, or if you buy a nice collection and I'll get rid of the component parts. Yeah, I mean, right now I have the room. Eventually I won't, and if I ever move, I would have to probably purge things, but for right now I have the space, and so I'm going to keep it in the hopes that I don't regret it, because I've gotten rid of stuff I've regretted over the years for sure. So yeah, and also I enjoy archiving it, I guess, in a weird way. I can interact with it, I have everything in order and organized, so it's kind of nice to be able to just go find stuff. I wish I had it all in a cloud or something, so that when I'm out at a store I know everything I have, but at least I can come home and go and find and see what books I'm missing, so anyway, it's something fun to do.
You need an intern to catalog it for you, right? And have a spreadsheet, and then try and figure out what you have on that spreadsheet that's like a trillion rows long. So you talked a little bit, you've been talking about the channel. I'd love to hear a little bit about, for the audience, because of course I know.
Yeah.
What you've done on the channel, what you plan on doing, what's kind of the mission, I suppose.
Well, we've been talking about my channel, and so anybody that goes and looks at my profile will find a link to a channel. That channel has 2 videos on it, so not very extensive. I had a previous channel that is no longer with us. I won't get into the specifics of that, just in case. But basically, I guess the universe intervened, and I was forced to regroup. So I have a new channel, new name, Comic Book Manifesto. Getting used to it, and so my plan with the channel is, I'm trying to look at it as an opportunity to maybe just be maybe a little more focused than I was the last time around. Though I was very happy with my channel previously, but I want to highlight books that don't get as much attention as they deserve. It was very hard for me last year to keep up with current reading, so I would like to try to be a little better about that this year and offer some more up-to-the-minute kind of stuff, and I mean, and a lot of these books, they'll come out, but no one talks about them. So even when they come out from Fantagraphic or New York Review of Comics, they still don't get talked about by anybody. So I'd like to be able to offer a little bit of a spotlight to these books. And then I'd just like to dig in the archives and pull out some interesting things. I had plans previously to do a series of videos on alternative comics, and I'd still like to do that. And I'd like to just put more of a spotlight on some of the, like I have a set of Raw magazine, and a lot of people don't. They're prohibitively expensive. So they're hard to find. So one of the benefits of me doing this as long as I have is I've been able to pick up things over the years that now are harder to find for people. And so if I'm able to kind of spotlight some of those things, so at least they can get a closer look and determine whether they think it's worth it for themselves, or maybe just satisfy their curiosity. They might think, oh, well, I don't need to buy a set of Raw, but it was cool to take a quick look at that, and then that's it. And one of the more ambitious things that I would like to do that just requires time is I would like to talk about cartoonists' bodies of work. And so, if we want to talk about Chester Brown, but then actually look at a whole stack of Chester Brown in one go, and kind of go through their sort of what they've accomplished so far. But I want to be able to do that with the proper amount of preparation and attention. I don't want to just go, oh, here's a few things, And,
right.
And so, and of course, there's lots of cartoonists that I'm very passionate about that I think a lot of people just either don't know or don't particularly care about. And those are the ones I really want to offer a spotlight to. Dan Clowes and the Hernandez brothers, these people have plenty of attention on them. They can always use more attention. I think they're still underrated, even as highly thought they are, but they do get attention. But there's other people who've been working in comics for 30, 40 years that, a book comes out and only, a few people take notice. So, anyway, I just want to basically spotlight comics that people aren't talking about and maybe just add a little bit to the discussion. And you mentioned before that I was willing to be negative, and I am. I don't know that I would focus videos on negativity. I probably wouldn't do that. And I do want to be conscious of it's very easy to be shitty, when the person's not sitting in front of you. And to me, there's a difference between putting, saying you don't like this work and here's why, and saying they're a bad person. Like, they're not the same thing. But it's also very easy to be cavalier about something that someone worked very hard on. So something on Twitter, I'm a lot more likely to just say 3 sentences of this didn't do much for me. I didn't find it to be very original, blah, blah, blah. On video, I probably wouldn't go into that as much unless I felt there was a really compelling reason to go after something. So, and I feel like in print, you can be a little more nuanced, even on Twitter, whereas a video, it's just more visceral, I think, to have someone trashing your stuff,
Well, I think you got to this point, but I wouldn't call it negative. I would call it critical, constructive criticism. Like, what I struggle with is there's a lot of folks that will give so much praise to books and not talk about the things that didn't work or that weren't as satisfying. Like, endings are really difficult for even the masters, right? And it's okay to say, like, I love this person's craft, I love their storytelling ability. The end of this book, not so great, right? It felt contrived. I think that's important. I know that we're both kind of getting more into the community of small press, indie, whatever. Yeah. And so that kind of vibe always, you become close or friends or friendly with these folks. And so it's hard to be critical publicly about them. But I do think that it's useful for us as a community to talk about what works and where there are areas of growth, because how do you grow? I think that part of my critique of comics in general is that there's not enough space for that. And I think years ago, when you had more folks who were critics that were more nuanced than they are today, or even a ways ago, right? There's a reason why we don't have as many folks around. I think it made the space better, and I don't know. part of the role of a critic is to also champion books. And so if we get rid of all the folks who are talking about these books in I don't even know, sophisticated ways is really even the way, because I think that scares people too, ways that kind of dive deeper than the surface level. Without those folks, the community becomes more of an echo chamber, right? And we're really not trying to grapple with what's going on. Like, I don't know. I just want to have a space that people feel okay with disagreeing with each other and pushing each other to become better, right? I'm not an art, well, I'm creative. I'm not a comic book artist, we'll say. And so, I take that as part of it. Like, I couldn't do this. I couldn't write a 300-page book. And so I think it's important to, as you say, acknowledge that, right? Just the ability, the follow through, right? The skill required to put together a book, even if it's an unsuccessful book for a variety of measures, is still an accomplishment, right? It's more than what I've done. And that's important. But at the same time, we should be able to have difficult discussions around this space. I'm kind of rambling, but I'll stop there and see if you have a response.
No, I agree with you 100%. And, the old print model is dead, right? The Comics Journal as it once existed is not going to come back. And while that wasn't a perfect publication, it allowed for people to write at length about comics, good, bad, and different. I mean, they had great writing, they had bad writing, everything in between, but it allowed for that kind of back and forth. And frankly, that publication was known for not really caring about offending people. They would put negative reviews of Fantagraphics material in the Comics Journal and infuriate their own artists sometimes. And of course, it's tough. If people aren't making any money, then they have to get, shit for it on the side too. That's got to be frustrating. But I think in the long run, it makes people take the work more seriously. That kind of back and forth. Something like Mouse is, it's now lionized, it's canonized, it's like it's an untouchable book pretty much. But, Harvey Pekar waged a letter column war against that book, in the early 90s, going back and forth with writers in the journal. And no one really remembers that now, but I think it added to, people fleshed out a lot of arguments. They went back and forth about it, and that kind of stuff helps. Pekar also went after Love and Rockets, and I think was dismantled pretty effectively. But I think that helps. I mean, nothing should be considered untouchable. I think you alluded to earlier, sometimes the criticism misses the mark, and they concentrate on things where they're more concerned with the wrong word choice somewhere, or it's the wrong look for current sensibilities by some people, instead of saying, well, was this a good book? Was it a good story, well told? How's the craft? Did they, is there any poetry in this? I mean, did they accomplish something? Right. Did it transcend just another book I read? And is it a great work? Jordan Crane's most recent book got a kind of a hatchet review on tcj.com. I thought that was I didn't think it was poorly written, but I thought it was poorly argued and just sort of missed the point of a book that I was impressed by. Yeah. And I have not been a fan of Jordan Crane's work. I mean, I've read most of his comics, and I thought they were okay. I was never blown away by his work ever. And but I was blown away by the new book. I thought it was very good. And so, but at the same time, while that review kind of irritated me, I'm happy it was written, and I'm happy it was posted, because at least it did lead to a lot of discussion. And let's face it, that book probably needed all the discussion it could get, So even if two more people go buy it, great. I'm glad that happened, So.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I agree with you. I didn't agree with the article. I felt like it hadn't read the same book that I had. However, I was so excited that that article exists and that lots of people were talking about it. I think I'd love for that dialogue to be more civil and productive than some of it became. You know, it is difficult in the Twitter sphere to have productive conversations. And I think folks, you know, sometimes, from my perspective, when certain comments or commenters should just be ignored, people engage too much. And in this space, I found a lot of success in ignoring and not engaging with people that aren't you know, don't have goodwill in the back and forth, right? You give them ammunition to shit on you or shit on other things in ways that just aren't helpful. And I see that as a kind of problem in this space. But I was really so excited that people were talking about a comic book, a graphic novel, even if it is in like these, you know, like there are lots of articles in the Comics Journal that nobody talks about ever, right? The fact that someone, you know, wrote something where people felt, you know, had a reaction to it is the point of criticism. And so I'm with you. Like I don't always want to read things that just agree with my perspective. I think that's boring, right? And part of why I like reading folks who do this, you know, that read this stuff all the time, that are so immersed in it, is because they see things that I don't, right? And I think it's particularly hard to look at to look at books that are new and not have the hindsight of many years, where you can start to really dig into some of the deeper themes that may not be as apparent, you know, as you're reading it while it's coming out. So I think it's a difficult thing to do well, but I'm always excited when I see it. And so I'm glad that, you know, folks like yourself are talking about these books in, you know, with some depth, and with some thought behind it. I hope that, you know, that more people follow suit, you know.
I agree.
I know we said that this was gonna be 10 minutes. I wonder, not to put you on the spot, but nothing controversial, but you know, in terms of spotlighting folks, are there any people that are front of mind that you think, you know, folks that are watching this video, that will watch this video, should be reading, or, you know, a couple artists that you think have done some important work that maybe you want to highlight here?
Yeah, off the top of my head, well, one of your artists, John Allen. No, I'm the captain of the John Allen fan club. I to me, his work would be appealing to almost anybody who would read it, and so I just want more people to read it. And I know he has a lot of followers on Instagram, but picking up a book and reading the whole book, not just, you know, 4 panels at a time or something, I think people would get so much more out of it than they would ever expect. And his sensibility is very different from someone like Peter Bagg, but for me, he's kind of the example I would use of this guy who's sort of doing comics about, you know, sort of aimless youth, or, you know, in a much different way. They don't really have much in common stylistically or even in tone, but I just feel like he's really doing mature, accomplished work, and he's such a fantastic cartoonist. And I think people see his work and they think, oh, it looks kind of simple, or it's, you know, animal characters, and they sort of are dismissive. Yeah. And I get it. You know, everyone has their own things. I have my things that I try to be so open-minded, but you have things where your eyes just sort of glaze over, right? And right. So it's tough to look at everything with fresh eyes. But I think that his work is incredible. I think you can start with any of his books. So yeah, he'd be the first one. He's on Instagram and has lots of followers, so I would definitely, if someone's watching, go check out his Instagram, see if it appeals to you at all. But the books are just, there's a lot more to them than I think people would think. One quick one. Let me grab this book real fast.
Sure. And I'll just say, while you're grabbing it, John Allen. You introduced me to John Allen, and I was blown away. I read not Julian Purgatory. What's the other one? The other cover. What's his other book?
Lonesome Era.
Lonesome Era, I think, is one of the most brilliant books I've ever read. It was so incredibly moving. It's so nuanced. It tells, I think, like a timeless tale of young people, of angst and youth, and sort of like that aimlessness that a lot of us have at some point in our lives. That sort of like inability to know what's coming next. That's so universal, but he tells it in such a unique way, I think. I adore all of his books, but that one in particular, I think, really, really just blew me away. And I think his style so adds to the story, because I think if you, as you say, you just kind of glance at it and you think, oh, well, this is really pretty, but it's animals or whatever. And I really think that his ability to use that he's able to do something very subtly, because of the style that he's chosen, right? So anyway, I sell his art, so of course I'm a big fan.
Yeah.
But like legitimately, I think he's one of the most underrated, exceptional talents that exist in comics today. I wish more people would read his books.
Me too. And especially since they are fun to read. It's not. There's some people where you're trying to say, well, this is serious work, you should check it out, but it's it's going to be challenging. Yeah, it's going to be a slog. Maybe you got to work through a bunch of even something like Love and Rockets that has been talked about so much lately because of the anniversary. The early issues aren't the most fun to read. You have to kind of get through those to get to the great stuff. With John Allen, it's really from panel 1 of the 4 books that are out. You can pick up any of them and just enjoy them immediately, which is rare and should be appreciated. This is a book, I was planning on doing a video about this at some point. I don't know if you've seen this in person. Nope. It's from Fantagraphics Underground. Their imprint of things they think aren't going to sell. Even compared to normal Fantagraphics books, they think these are, the real, like, oh, who's going to buy this? So, so this is by Hans Rickett. I think that's how you say his name, and Chrissy Dorn, who I think might be his wife. So I've read Hans Rickett's work before. He's got a really appealing art style, but his subject matter has never really interested me that much. But I saw this book in the bookstore. Well, here we go, animals again. People are gonna think I'm a furry or something, but
nothing wrong with that. I have many clients that are furries. Nothing wrong with it.
So, but I think it might be the combination of working with his wife that the art is really appealing. It's a really smooth read, and this book looks kind of like it'd be a YA book or something. It's got squirrels and stuff, but it gets really dark. And I think that's why it ended up on Fantagraphics Underground, because they really thought, who's gonna read this? Because it looks like you should hand it to a 13-year-old, but you really shouldn't hand it to a 13-year-old.
Yeah.
Not that there's anything pornographic in it, but it gets very violent, is what I should say. So I think they thought, well, this isn't something we're going to be stocking on YA shelves and Barnes and Nobles, But I really, really enjoyed this book way more than I expected to. It was a really surprising read. So like I said, I may talk about this at some point, but I had it as a stack of stuff to maybe consider, and I just thought, this is a book no one has mentioned. The comic critic Ryan Carey, who is online as Four Color Apocalypse, he and I talked about this book of being the weirdest, like, out of left field surprise in a long time. It's like you did not expect to enjoy it as much as you did. So, also, this is known to a lot of people. The new issue of King Cat is out. I read King Cat. I've read his books. I'm not the biggest John Porcellino fan in the world. But you talk about admiring the accomplishment of someone who has just continued to put out work for decades now, and just does it on his own terms, does it for himself. You know, I don't know if this makes him any money at all, but maybe it makes him a little bit, but I think he just does it because he wants to do it. And each issue of King Cat is its own thing. You know, it has lists of songs he likes and has, you know, stuff about animals he's seen. And so it's kind of a little event. I've come to really appreciate it more than I used to. That's for sure. But yeah, I just read this last night, so it's top of mind. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing a few folks with us. You know, I know you only have 2 videos up on your channel, but the old one had like billion. It seemed like you were producing them. Were you doing like 1 a week, 2 a week, something like that at one point?
I would go in spurts, but I think I had about 120 in that range. So, and that included some chats with luminaries like yourself, and so I hope to recreate that magic at least a little bit. So I'll try.
Well, I'm really go ahead.
No, I've learned some lessons, so hopefully I can, you know, we'll see.
The return, the phoenix coming from the ashes.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really excited that you're back at it. Folks can find you at Comic Book Manifesto. Just follow the link in his profile. How often do you think that you'll be putting out videos now? I know you're still kind of regrouping and kind of planning for the future.
Yeah, I've had a couple things going on, so it's I have not produced as much, but honestly the reason I just went ahead and relaunched is because I just didn't want to have any, you know, if you wait for everything to be perfect, you'll never do anything. So It really was, let me just put something up and that'll spur me to do more. So I've been kind of gathering some notes and some things. So I'll probably do some shorter videos just looking at individual books and comics. And yeah, so I don't know that I'm ever going to keep a schedule because obviously I don't do this for a living, but I liked being able to sort of put out things pretty regularly and having that back and forth. But every month I look at the previews catalog. That's kind of my one scheduled thing a month that I try to do. And so that was my first video back, and I'll be doing that again on the 25th or whatever. So or the end of the month, whatever the last Wednesday of the month is, I'll try to do that. But otherwise, just want to look as much stuff as I can.
I love those previews videos because I'm always surprised at what you stop on. Sometimes it's like something mainstream that you're like, I don't know if I'll grab it, or, you know, and I'm like, why is it even giving time to this? But I think it shows your true love of the medium of comics, and you know, while you are focused more particular on a certain area, I think acknowledging other things is also, you know, important too. So I think as much as we've talked and hung out in real life, I'm like, the previous videos is like the soul of Colin.
It is. Yeah, I for years I thought I read this thing more carefully than a lot of retailers do, you know. And that was one of those things where I was like, well, I may as well talk about this and see, you know. And once again, sometimes it's just catching a book, and maybe if that makes 1 or 2 more people buy it, that's awesome. And you know, it might just make them more aware of it. They see it in a store, maybe they'll. So because that's for me too. If I see something in a store, I might have the catch of recognition of, oh, someone mentioned this, and that might make me actually pick it up and look at it. I might not want it, but it makes me take a second look at it. So, I think
that. I love that. I always have that moment of like, I'm here, I need to buy something because I'm wasting the air in this space. You know, and sometimes you're just like, there's nothing connecting. Sure. And then I think, yeah, you know, like, oh, Colin talked about this. You know, and if I happen to see it, I'm like, okay, well, it was meant to be, you know. Well, we should wrap up because we said 20 minutes and now it's an hour.
Okay.
So folks can follow you, Comic Book Manifesto. Is there anything you'd like to leave our audience with? Any final thoughts?
No, not for me. But I will say I've seen you mention on social media your Discord that you run a couple
Oh,
times,
sure.
and that thing's really lively lately. I've been on
Okay.
it since you started it, and it goes through periods, but that thing is really hopping. And so I would say anyone that's watching this who's interested in original art at all should come check it out because there's a pretty big variety of people. You know, it used to just be a handful of people that really commented, but now it's all over the place. So it's hard to keep
Yeah.
up.
I love that you're better at plugging my stuff than I am. No, I think I'm glad you brought it up. It's really an exciting space, and we have a collector from Australia, we have someone from Belgium, we have a variety of, I consider myself a kind of lower tier. I don't know, a small timer in original art world. I don't got a lot of money. I probably spend too much money on it, but I'm not buying, tens of thousands of dollars worth of comic book art, and there are people in there that do, and they are pretty much equal to the folks that are spending $200 on a piece of art. And I just love that interesting combination of all those different personalities and collecting styles, and the fact that it's really celebratory. Even these people post things that maybe are not my cup of tea, or I wouldn't buy them, but I can see why someone may be interested in it. And that's why I wanted to start something like that, because for often, and I think you had talked as well about how we often do this collecting in isolation, and which is really great because you're doing it because you legitimately want. You aren't showing it to anybody, or if you show it to people, I used to post it on my personal social media, and people, no one would say anything or comment or like it. You're just like, well, all right, I guess that's nice that I like it. But having a group of cheerleaders, I think, is really satisfying. And there are folks that are more active than others. And as you say, it kind of sometimes it's not as active, and sometimes you're like, what's going on? I try and every once in a while throw a question out there to get people going, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
But I'm always surprised that when I'll just go in one day and there's 1,000 posts from people interacting on someone bought some art, or someone went to a museum showing of original art. So it's been really satisfying, and I'm glad you're in the community as well.
Yeah.
So
I don't comment too often, but I read almost every single post that goes up there. I have the notification, so I try to keep up with it. And one more shout out while we're talking about the Discord. One of the guys who's in the Discord, Jason, has a YouTube channel, Comic Art Channel. I saw him pop up here at one point amongst the people who had tuned in. He was really supportive of me when my previous channel went the way of the dodo. So, but he's another guy. There isn't a lot on YouTube about original art. And he talks about comics and original art. And sometimes he talks about comics I care about, sometimes he doesn't. But anyway, I think he has a good channel. It's just called Comic Art Channel, very easy to find. But definitely worth watching because he's a serious collector, and it's cool to see some of the stuff he gets. I mean, he's definitely taken my breath away a couple times. He'll go to the end of the video and I'm like, holy shit,
Yeah. It's so funny. That's the thing about this world is, I think the original art collecting for a long time was very insular, and now folks like Felix Liu have kind of expanded out into a broader audience. And sometimes you'll just be talking to somebody and you're like, oh yeah, it's just like a normal collector, run-of-the-mill collector, and then they're like, here's this I don't know, I don't even know what, Jaime Hernandez cover.
Yeah.
Here's the issue 3 cover of Love and Rockets. No big deal. And you're like, what?
Yeah.
You are not a normal human. How is that even possible? And the stories around that stuff that I just find really fascinating, especially the folks who've been in the collecting world longer than me, where things were not as crazy expensive, and it was yeah, you had to like, before the internet, you had to like know people and go places and really do your research in a very different way. I find that stuff super fascinating. I feel like someone needs to make a documentary about original art collecting. No, probably it would be, no one's ever going to do that because no one would care. But I really think
that people are too secretive. You know,
people. Yeah, but a lot of those folks are getting older, though.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
I think that there are so many stories, like Felix talks a little bit about them occasionally on his podcast, that are going to be lost to time, you know? And I think capturing this world, especially, you know, before the sort of like investment banker, not even investment bankers, but like the Russian oligarchs started getting into comic book collecting, like it's so fascinating. But anyway, I'd love to capture that. Maybe people could like record them and then release them when they die. At least we can have them somewhere. Anyway, I guess we're off topic, on topic. Who knows? Well, thanks, Colin, so much for chatting with me today. I'm really excited to see what you come out with next. I hope that I can jump on your channel again at some point. Talk about original art. I'd love to have you. I have a whole like set of questions around original art, but we don't have time for that today. So maybe we'll have to do a part 2.
We should do that.
All right. Well, again, follow Colin at Comic Book Manifesto. And yeah, we'll all be online. You can follow me at Athenian Comic Art. Just follow me on Instagram, Twitter. I don't use Facebook for reasons. I have a YouTube channel that's been kind of dormant for a little bit, but I think we're going to be interviewing some artists soon. So, all right, everyone, thanks for joining us, and look out for future last-minute live videos.
Thank you, John.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye.